Cardano Spaceplace, episode number 109, Turbo Time. All right. Hey, y'all.
Hello.
What's happening?
I love
Welcome
that
to-
music every time. It's like,
Doesn't
yeah,
it
let's
get
get
you
it going.
Let's get going.
To a special nerd out edition of Cardano Spaceplace. We are saying hello to the nerd out crowd as well as the Spaceplace crowd. Welcome, everybody. Good to see you. And thank you, Sam Leathers, for joining us today. But just as Sam Leathers, not as IOG Sam Leathers, but just Sam Leathers. And
That's correct. I'm on my own behalf today.
fantastic. And welcome, Andrew. Thank you. Often guest, often visitor to the Spaceplace crew. We'd love to have you aboard. And thanks for coming today.
Yeah. So we're talking Daedalus Turbo. So
That's
there's
right.
been Daedalus Turbo new paper came out. It's Catalyst Milestone 3, I believe, is currently in review. And Alex Zirkoff is the operator of Daedalus Turbo, that project. He reached out to me, asked me to kind of review his stuff. I've been looking into it the last week or two. I know Sam has also done a lot of looking into it. So we've been digging through code, and we're going to talk Daedalus Turbo today.
Fantastic. So hopefully you can bring it down to the earth for some of us mere mortals.
We'll try.
Who are trying to understand.
It's complex stuff in this one we're talking about. So we'll see how it goes.
If the developer, if the guy who's working on this project ends up watching this, I just want to say that I am really, really sorry. Sorry, I don't want to get emotional, but I do feel like a giant asshole. And I have had bad tendencies in the past of going a little too hard in the paint with something that I feel very passionate about, and if I feel a certain way. And it's not even the tribal aspect, it's just a part of my personality. And when I first learned about the project or whatever, my opinion was formed based on some of the opinions of other people. I'm not going to lie about that. But I think I went a little too hard in the paint in my criticisms, and I really am, from the bottom of my heart, I am very sorry for how I spoke to you and some of the things I said. And it was very out of line, uncalled for, and you definitely proved everybody wrong.
Yeah, and I would like to second that. I came after him pretty hard as well, and so I would like to apologize as well. After looking at the code, there's a lot to be impressed with. There's some issues too, but we'll talk about that. There's always two sides to every coin, and we'll get into that as we go here. What Daedalus Turbo is. I think a lot of people don't really understand what it is, and I think we need to talk about that, clear up some misconceptions in people's mind about what it is, what it's going to potentially bring to the table, and how it fits into the greater Cardano ecosystem. Regardless, it's an important part of the story of Cardano because it shows that Catalyst is about the community. So this is one where kind of the OGs were like against it, but the Cardano community voted and said, no, we want this, and funded it. And it's kind of a testament that Cardano is a decentralized ecosystem, and OGs like myself, we don't always get to make the decisions as to what gets funded and what gets worked on. And so, yeah, that's my opening statement there on Daedalus Turbo.
Very cool. And let's take a moment here. Thank you, Chris, for also sharing your perspective on that. It is important. I know early on there was some suspicion at the bare minimum. Large sum of money, product that sort of kind of sounds a little like something that was already in the pipeline with IO, but different. And and then in fairness to the gentleman, he felt really attacked, and he was being real. He had to be real defensive of his ideas, he's brought some ideas to the table that have some interesting impact on the space. And I do think we need to get to this, what it does and what it doesn't do, because it's not going to do everything, right? This is not a complete. We got going on. There's maybe Kyle's. Sorry, we got some feedback. We're not going to be in a space where we have one reign supreme winner here of something, whether it's an IOG product, whether it's this other thing coming in. We have to understand what these products are, what they mean, and what are the security implications of using one over another. That's the idea of having this broadly, thank you, Andrew, this broadly decentralized community that we have here. And there's actually a question in the audience here. I'll grab it real quick. I'm assuming you're probably going to cover this, but does Daedalus work with Mithril snapshots as well now by a DApp connector? Does Daedalus have any connection whatsoever to Mithril right now?
No.
So not yet. It might. Possibility exists for that. The code for Daedalus is open. Someone could take the code and modify that.
It does run a full node, but it bootstraps from Genesis. It does not currently bootstrap from a Mithril snapshot, although it could.
Okay,
but tweaked.
That's also true of this client here, right? This Daedalus Turbo client. It does not bootstrap from Genesis, does it?
It does not. It's currently more of a, I would say the level it's at is a proof of concept phase right now. We came after Alex, let's say his name, Alex Sirkov.
Mm-hmm.
We came at him pretty hard, saying what he wanted to do was impossible. From what I've seen, the techniques he's using, although they're not exhaustive and they don't validate as much quite as the Haskell Cardano node client does today, I think to me he's proven that the technique can improve performance. I think that's the biggest part of what he's accomplished with his milestone 3 is the concept is proven. There are performance improvements that could be made even if IO took those and implemented them in the Haskell client, or whether he takes what his vision is to take Daedalus Turbo and shove it in and kind of replace the guts of Daedalus. Although there's any number of ways he could go. He could call it something else, call it Sirkov Turbo and build his own wallet out of it. That's an option too.
Absolutely.
But I mean, to my understanding is that there were some initial concerns with how the validation was done, relevant from a security perspective. And if those concerns are valid, then obviously the way the community approached it, an apology is due in that regard. But if the concerns remain, then I believe that the context, you see what I'm saying, the context that it was displayed wasn't really done in the community was right in that regard as well. But the byproduct being amazing sophistication and techniques that we can apply, that's awesome. That's a lesson we can learn. I mean, there's multiple things happening in parallel here. So,
and I mean, that's another thing where the argument can be made. It's like it's wonderful. Every experiment, especially a failed experiment, is still valuable, right? Because lessons are learned. So if we can take the lessons from this, which I think several lessons came out of this, I would say milestone review process came partially out of this. The change of how the presentation of community reviews changed out of this. It looks like there may be some valuable code that could be implemented in any number of ways, or techniques rather than code, techniques that could be implemented in a number of ways. So that's the important thing about ingenuity, about innovation, is that things are gonna break, things are gonna go wrong. What do we learn from it? What did we take as value out of it?
Yeah, to be fair, at the very beginning, he never claimed that what he was building was going to be as secure as the Haskell node. It was always like, okay, we're going to make a trade-off performance for security. And if there are people that are comfortable with that, then they could use this faster wallet. It's kind of the same trade-off we make today with using a light wallet. You're trusting Eternal or the Lace backend, or you're trusting that they're going to run good, correct infrastructure.
Right on.
This, you're pulling more of those pieces into your local client, but you're still not quite going to have the same level of security you get as with a full node. Now, maybe it can get there, but just looking at where we're at today, it's not at the same level as a Haskell Cardano node. So if you're one of those people that's like, I care about security and security and correctness the most, like that's my number one, and then performance is somewhere down the list, then you may not want to jump on Daedalus Turbo day one when it comes out. But you may want to think about those trade-offs you're making every time you use any product, not just this particular one.
Absolutely. And so Sam, can you talk a little bit about some of those trade-offs? Can you kind of just from your perspective, your point of view, what are some of these trade-offs between the Haskell client and the stuff that's we're seeing with Alex's work here?
Yeah, so absolutely. First off, foundations of a blockchain. When you have a blockchain, you're basically building a block on top of a block on top of a block on the top of a block. That's what gives you your security layer, essentially. And each of those blocks basically validates that all these previous ones were valid because they build on top of that tip of the chain there. So what, from the little time I spent looking into this, but from what I can tell, what he's doing is he's parallelizing all the block calculations to see that the block hashes match up with the KES keys that are associated with it. And then he does that in parallel across all the blocks in the epoch. And while he's doing that, he pulls the state out of some of the transactions. That
Lloyd,
basically
can you
says,
share my screen while Sam's
yeah,
talking?
absolutely.
Because
Absolutely.
I've got let's pull up his actual paper he produced as part of Milestone 3. So
yeah, that sounds like a good idea. So then basically you have all these things and you these transactions that are spending inputs, and rather than validating that that input actually exists and it can be spent, it just assumes that because of the security of the blockchain itself, that since this was validated by since other blocks have validated that this is in the chain, that some node has agreed that this stuff is secure, then it just says, I'm going to take all these transactions, throw them into some sort of map, and then at the end of when it gets through the entire epoch, then it generates its own state table, which is not the same as the ledger state in the node, but gives you some information that you can query to. For example, his CLI tool he has in there lets you query by stake address and then get a list of all the UTXOs associated with it. And then it can use that representation to give you some information about the blockchain. Which, to go on what other people have said, is far more than I expected when I first heard about this project on Catalyst. I haven't followed it nearly as closely as you guys because, I mean, I'm the ScienceNet guy. I've been pretty busy. But it's impressive that he's come up with some code that actually does something and gives you some output where it's at right now. Yeah, so I actually have the first pull request on his code base, adding a Nix lake to it so I could actually get the thing to build. But yeah, so Andrew, you want to go through this and explain in detail what he's going for here?
Yeah, so the first part of what he's doing is the actual parallelized downloading all the chunks in parallel. Now, to me, this is not the impressive piece, and if I were him, I would have skipped this piece entirely. But essentially, there's a centralized server out there that allows you to parallel download all the chunks, and chunks contain a bunch of blocks. And then each of those can be parallelized across any number of threads. So he tries to process all the chunks in parallel, and he does basically he does a merge process that merges all the chunks into some global order. So the idea is that he has certain tasks that are categorized as you can do the validation ahead of time because they don't rely on anything previous in the blockchain. So for example, he shows this background low priority work queue. And so anytime he has any type of validating for VRF stuff or validating like signatures on transactions, like stuff that you can validate a signature of the transaction before you validate that that particular UTXO is associated with that signature and whether that UTXO is available to be spent. So you can kind of pull some of the validation up front, run those in parallel, and then you have the sequential path that performs stuff at the end kind of as enough pieces of the parallel stuff get done. That's kind of how he's structured things. So tons of threads, tons of work processes happening in parallel. There's like 4 different main things he's doing. I think the merge, the aggregation, validation, and one more I can't think of. But yeah, it's very interesting how he's done that. He's got some really good, solid data structures he built for fast querying of this data. Yeah, and I think in general, it's at least something that should trigger some conversations inside of IOG as to I guess, questioning the current order that things are validated every time a new block arrives. Like, are there things that could be parallelized, or do we focus solely on correctness to such an extent that okay, here's the block, transaction 1, validate everything in it, make sure it's all done, then move on to transaction 2, validate everything, are there some things that could be parallelized? Could we just go through and quickly say, are all these signatures correct? Do that right away in parallel, then go back and check to see whether UTXOs are available in the ledger state to be spent. Does this particular signature own that UTXO? Yeah, so there's definitely some opportunities to improve performance. But yeah, he doesn't validate 100% of the things that the Haskell node does. Like we talked about some of those. But he does validate a good chunk of them, or at least it proves the concept in my mind.
So, and I think this is where it does start to get interesting and a little bit of the nuance comes out here. It doesn't validate everything that the Haskell node validates. So to a layman, what's the value of validating all of that? What makes that better for our community? What makes us safer or not?
Yeah, I mean, it's
sorry.
Go ahead. You go ahead, Sam.
I was going to say that's what prevents double spends. That's what prevents money coming out of nowhere and whatnot. It's if you look at this diagram he has here, I mean, that's super cool that he's come up with this idea that I can validate a lot of this stuff separate in a thread. However, where the key lynch point is going to be is how much stuff he actually validates and apply ledger updates and performing the end of epoch activities. He's put a lot of thought into the perform epoch end of activities. And you can see that because he's getting the reward balances correct from his calculations that he's doing without looking at the Cardano ledger state at all. And I'm sure Andrew can talk more about that when he starts going into the code here some. But the apply ledger state updates is probably, especially since Alonzo, where probably 90% of that validation is happening. So even if you optimize all this stuff, if you still have to do all that stuff sequentially to apply ledger state updates, you're still going to get into a slowness there.
Yeah, and so double spend. I mean, that's first of all, that's like the scariest, the scariest thing in blockchain, right? On an unspent,
Exactly.
extended unspent transaction output, that's the whole point. We have to know which ones are unspent, right? That's the whole thing. So, and a double spend means that somebody managed to spend an unspent transaction twice to make it
Yep.
to try to really nail that point home for folks. Um, so yeah, what are we showing us here, Andrew? Let's try to.
I'm just showing some of the benchmarks.
Mhm.
You know, just seeing some of the performance improvements. And we do need to say that it's definitely not doing all the same checks. There are, in the README file in his GitHub repo, he does say that certain things are definitely not validated. So Pluto scripts are one of those that aren't checked. If he gets a block and it says, "Oh yeah, it's valid," then he just treats it as valid. If the block says it failed, then he treats it as failed.
A transaction, you mean?
Yes, a transaction. And multi-sig native scripts, those are also not validated currently. Other things that aren't quite there is the kind of following the tip of the chain. This is only just looking at past data and seeing how fast he can scan it. It doesn't ever switch modes to follow the tip of the chain and connect to peers or any of that stuff. That's all future work, from what I understand.
Which also
Let
means
me-
no consensus rollbacks. So if something
Yeah,
happens
that's-
on the chain and then it is rolled back, that's something that's out of scope currently with this current
Yes.
milestone.
Yeah. So if this code ever hits a bug, or like it finds something that a signature that fails, like the whole thing just falls over. So that's why I say it's a proof of concept. Like there was when I was testing, I had to go back and forth with them because there was a chunk from his server that came down wrongly or something like that, and he had to go and fix it so that I could actually get all the way through parsing the chain. So yeah, there's definitely some robustness improvements that can be made here. So it's not going to be a drop-in replacement for a Cardano Haskell node, I don't think.
So, Sir Kernan was asking, will any of this research cross over to help with alternate node clients?
Great question. I wanted to get to this topic. So when I've done a lot of work with leader logs and figuring out when pools will make blocks. And to do that, I had to replicate a lot of the code or go through the process that the Haskell node decides when a pool is allowed to make a block. And there's some really, sorry, this is going to get too low, not for nerd out, but there's a math library in the Cardano Haskell node called fixed. And it has a fixed decimal arithmetic library. So Cardano uses 32 decimal point fixed math, and it uses this when it's calculating whether a given pool is allowed to make a block. Now, I've rewritten that code in Rust, and I have not been able to find a single decimal-based arithmetic library that works quite the same way as the Haskell library. So it's super painful. I got as close as I possibly could, like down to, I'll be checking it, like what does the Haskell node spit out? What does my CNCLI code spit out? And 32 decimals, like most of the time, it would be exactly correct. And then every 10 checks or so, the last decimal point would be off. And it was super frustrating. So that's one area where I would actually like to see an update made on the Haskell side, is switching out that specific Haskell library for something like a C library. What's the name of it? MPFR, GNU GNU MPFR is a math precision library that anybody could use. Haskell could call into it, Rust could call into it, Java, Kotlin, C#, C, anybody could use it. And if we all just reach consensus that, kind of like we use libsodium for doing our VRF calculations, like if we just all decided this is the math library we're going to use for this one area of code, that would make it much easier in the future when we need client diversity. Right now, I don't recommend we go for client diversity. It's too early. But it is an area that we'll have to think about when we get there. So all that to say, his calculation for leadership logs was not using any fixed decimal math. It was just using regular double precision floating point arithmetic, which is good enough to validate the entire Cardano mainnet chain, but it doesn't guarantee that it will validate from here forevermore, because there could be some pool that makes a block that in his node, just comes in just under the limit or just over the limit, and the Haskell node will give a different answer. And it's the same with my CNCLI library. Like, I think mostly 100% of the time it's going to be accurate, but there's always that lightning strike chance that it may not be exactly correct. But that's one area we definitely need to look at when we get to client diversity. And I don't think we should go for client diversity yet. I think we should wait until after something like input endorsers, just because it's such a big change. And at that point, we will have hit all the major Cardano blockchain trilemma issues. We will have reached all 5 of the big pillars of Cardano. And at that point, I would imagine the chain will evolve a little more slowly with new features and such.
Right on.
Sorry for blabbing for too long.
Not at all. No, that was great. And we got another one here from Martinez. He's saying that handling rollbacks with parallelized computation sounds like huge complexity, although it could switch to sequential processing when it reaches K blocks to tip. Does that sound?
Absolutely. That's a possibility.
Yep. And Circarin wanted to say, fantastic answer. Thank you. So Soup is telling us that he's into the tip of the chain. There's more on the tip. Welcome to Spaceplace. Thank you, Soup. So we got this is some fascinating stuff going on here, right? We're digging into the internals here has brought up some things that we can continue to work on, some things that as a community we probably need to be aware of. This is interesting on the math library, is that, yeah, if we don't all agree on something like that, it's going to cause some problems. I'm curious if there's, Sam, is there a reason that we wouldn't use a generic library right now? Is there something specific in there that we need to be using this Haskell math lib, or?
Probably it's just that was the math library they found that did the calculation they needed to. And it is just not quite the same as other math libraries. I mean, that's always the fun thing when you're using a third-party library rather than rolling your own. You never quite get exactly what you want, and you just have to work around some things.
Fair enough.
Yep.
Yep. And I did see Josh came in and to
Thank
say
you.
hello. At first, I thought Josh said "nerds out" because he came in for a second and popped out, but then he came back. So I guess he wasn't.
Yeah,
he
no,
wasn't
I just
nerds
well,
as a funny-
I was playing around there. I think I came with the wrong account initially. I don't know, but yeah, I had to hop out. Yeah, I think it's because I'm streaming it on my channels as well. But I want to echo a few sentiments that some of you guys said earlier. So I want to join Chris in saying, like, sorry to the Drip Drops team. I didn't really sort of like bash them at all, but they did become an example for me when we were talking about funding and the catalyst, and we say, oh, well, I'm not a Daedalus Turbo kind of thing. Although I had followed their progress a little bit, and so I had seen their updates, so I had seen that they were doing something. So for quite a while, I've seen something on the horizon. But got to thank Andrew Westberg, because you know, he's quite a trusted man in the community, and you really pointed out that you were running tests. We saw the preliminary, you know, examples of what you're doing. And so now, are you saying this fully works now? Is that what you're saying?
No, no,
Oh,
I'm saying it's a
okay.
great proof of concept. And I think it highlights a number of areas where we can improve, where we need to
You say
challenge our
we, who are you
assumptions.
talking about? Who are you talking about we?
We Cardano, we
Right.
IOG, we everybody in
corporate
the
we.
space, like
Mhm.
corporate like we as a community went out and bashed Daedalus Turbo. A lot of that was probably like, oh, they're getting a lot of money. Well, that could have been used somewhere else, maybe in my project. You know, there's a lot of
And it
tribalism
changed
we've
the
got
whole
here.
funding. Like, we're all
Yeah,
in milestones now. But not that I say milestones are a bad thing either. I think they, you know, that is probably something that should have been done. And just Daedalus Turbo highlighted that problem that, you know, oh, you're going to trust me with all this money, or are you going to let me, you know? And it's like, well, will you do it in milestones? And I think that despite their good intentions and that they're really working on it and trying to do it, but it actually spurred on quite a sort of good thing for Catalyst, I think, at least.
For sure.
good and bad. I mean,
Yeah.
it caused a lot of overhead cost to be added to every single project. So
Yeah.
that's the
Mm.
flip side.
Especially when we weren't prepared for it. It's fine now that we're prepared for it, and you can bake those costs in. But in that round, it was very hard to deal with the overhead costs
Yep.
that we're
I can imagine.
not
I mean,
ready for.
A
I've
lot of
just
people
done it
got
with-
frustrated at that alone because all of a sudden the rules have changed mid-game, and everybody was like, "The fuck," you know?
Yeah, no. Jeff was running Ada Pulse at that time, so he dealt with all that. Now I've just got the sort of the legacy of it, and it was all kind of laid out pretty straightforward. And
Right.
so now that they've sort of fixed it, I think it was a bit of a rush at the time. I know Jeff was stressed.
It was tough
You
in the
know,
beginning.
moving
I
the
was there as
goalpost.
well. Yeah, I was there as well, running the Fund 9 stuff. And it was hard. You know, it was hard for all of us. But I was also part of the conversation with, should we be funding something like Daedalus Turbo?
Mm.
And it's interesting because there's and this is one of the important things. We've heard a lot of it on social. It's like, oh, I guess we were all wrong, and Daedalus Turbo is completely right, and everything's right in the world. Well, Daedalus Turbo is Alex
Getting
is
there.
building something. What he's building is interesting. What he's building may have some application in a number of places. It may or may not be what his original vision was, but all of that aside, what is important is that this whole community is, we do come together, we do figure out where we've got problems, we work through our problems, and then we're saying, hey, he was right over here.
There's
But
a
what
lot
I
of
don't want to
apologies to
happen,
be made
yeah,
by lots of people. I know you
well,
guys have made some apologies here, but you know, there's so many. The amount of people that put Turbo in their Twitter handle, every one of those people need to kind of apologize a little bit.
well, I mean,
But I kind of saw this coming though. So I know, Andrew, you said they're not there yet, but I saw it coming because they were producing results and I was following their Twitter and seeing it.
Yeah.
So I was a bit like, okay, this could be happening, you know.
Yeah, and it's I
And I
think
hope
it's
they
more
do. Charles
interesting.
said they couldn't do it, pretty much.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
maybe not in
it's
those.
interesting. It's interesting from the standpoint of, you know, Catalyst is an innovation fund. And I think we need to remember that Catalyst is not we only fund guaranteed successful projects. Sometimes you've got to fund something that's out of bounds, a little wacky. See what somebody can do. Maybe it'll shake some ideas loose.
Absolutely. Drip Drop's
even
got
if this
funded,
goes,
you know, so you gotta
yeah, even if it's like, even if this never goes anywhere into a commercialized product, or, you know, like, I don't think, for me personally, the security guarantees, I probably won't ever run a Daedalus Turbo node. Probably.
I didn't catch it. I was listening. I didn't catch security.
Well, the
issues.
takeaway is it's good talent here, and it was money well spent. If we can, those techniques. Hey, if you want to keep playing and come up with cool shit, man, that we can use to improve the ecosystem, you got my vote.
Right.
Give it,
I mean,
give it a crack. Basically,
we paid a person in a team not only to build something for the community, we paid them to get a super educated person that now knows how the Cardano blockchain works at some of the lowest levels. So that's an important takeaway as well. Like Alex isn't going to go anywhere. He's in the community now. If I need to reach out to somebody and say, how does this work? He probably knows how something works. Like he's another resource that people can tap to say, here's what I'm building. How do you think I should go about it?
Because we need more of those guys. Actually,
exactly. That type of talent is priceless, and so like that's what I'm saying. If you want to,
the more we have, the better. As you know, I'm a man who reaches out for help all the time. Mainly on the sort of staple best practices Telegram group, and there's always someone to help. And we need more of those. Maybe there should be a group of you guys team together.
Well, they gather here on a regular basis.
Well, you've got the okay, yeah. I mean, you've got the cream here, but there's still some fat to come on. I mean, we've got Johnny, from Intertree or whatever it is.
It's age old. You even look at like just there's different facets of the community come with each cycle, right? We're gonna get a whole new influx of people, and it's just human nature to be defensive to the ecosystem that you built, right? Like to have a bias, and so that's going to play in. Like you've seen it now, Josh. A couple generations of the stake pool operators that come, and all the new ones get mad at the old ones, and it's like, okay, here comes the new, and it's going to happen again. So everyone's going to be evil, and
what's funny is I'm an old one, and I should be mad at all the new ones.
Well,
because basically it's all about money. If you make money, people get mad at you, and that's just the way it is. So that's why no one's mad at me. I'm not making
easy way to keep people from getting mad at you is just don't make any money.
Yeah, exactly. But I've got funding for AdaPulse, so I'm pretty fucking happy about that. So
good.
I want to line up. I've already spoken to Chris about an interview. Carl, I want to interview you as well.
I'm down
for. But different projects. I don't want to interview the same people for
no, that's fine.
But you've got quite a big team, so you can split it up like that. So, definitely need to get an interview with Daedalus Turbo team for sure.
And now hopefully from this you'll have some context too, because it's not about it necessarily being a finished product. Right now, funny enough, in Fund 11, they would have fit in the proof of concept category, which funds up to, I believe, it's 150,000 ADA. So that's another part of this discussion. It's like they got approved for an extremely large sum of ADA.
150,000.
Well, no, they readjusted stuff after the community went skewed with Turbo. Because if Turbo was,
I didn't know they changed.
They added milestones and
Fund 11.
Sorry, no, I know.
Fund
about
11,
that.
we have 3 different areas. You can be funded for 150,000, 300,000, or 750,000, right? Or 700,000.
Yeah, because that's all the milestones. So
that's the different tiers. And so the tier that something like Daedalus Turbo actually fits under is a proof of concept tier, which in current parlance would only net up to 150,000 ADA to work on it. So we've gotten more nuanced as a community as to what's acceptable for proof of concept versus something that's an MVP versus something that's a launched product, and we offer different levels of funding for those different tiers, and that's another learning that came out of this whole experience, is to get to this point. So lots of good learning, lots of good things happening.
What I love is in the face of adversity, they just stuck to it. Did it, and they haven't done it, but they put the work in at least.
They're putting work in, and
it seemed from what Andrew was saying, some quite creative ideas that they were doing without Mithril. So
and the code is is very useful as, well, I'll just say this. Haskell code is really hard to read, especially if you're not a Haskell dev.
I've heard, yeah.
And we now have a nice set of code that is mostly correct, that is in C, that is very easy to read for most computer people. They can at least read it to understand what it's attempting to do. And we know how to validate Byron blocks. We've shown how to validate Mary blocks, Shelley blocks, Babbage blocks, Alonzo blocks. We've got code for validating signatures. We've got code for encoding and decoding CBOR. We've got an ED25519 library now. Like, there's a lot of code that was put into Daedalus Turbo that we now have reference-ish implementations of, that everybody can look at and read and see, like, oh, how does consensus work? How does Proust consensus work? Oh, I can look at this code and I can see step by step now.
It's not fully open source though yet, is it?
It is.
Oh, is it?
It is. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think he's popularized it yet and published it, but he wants to clean up some loose ends. He just shared it with a few of us internally. But I think in the next couple of days, it's going to go public. Yeah, it's going to be out there.
But yeah.
So that was one of the requirements of this one, is that the code does have to be released publicly. So, so those learnings.
Oh, that was like the final milestone kind of thing.
That information is going to be out there.
Final milestone is not delivered until 2025. I think it's a huge milestone, is the last fourth milestone, which is get the whole thing integrated into Daedalus. Which there's still some. I still have a lot of doubts whether that's going to happen. But that is the last milestone, is make it work in Daedalus.
But now Catalyst will only cover you for 12 months, though. They wouldn't cover that sort of length.
That's right. That's another thing that was changed, is that we now have a maximum time frame.
Is that a good thing, though? I mean, for me, it's fine.
It is. What we're doing is limiting the scope of what an innovation fund is going to fund. It's only going to fund certain things in a certain scope. So, and then that's what's changing there. Or has changed there, and I think for the better, is that we now have a scope of, this is what we're willing to tolerate. And of course, it's Catalyst, it can change, and it will. There'll be other innovations
over years,
but decades, for now, we've settled on this is the scope in which we're willing to risk funding, and I think that's been a big part of our growth for Catalyst. So I heard Andrew was laying down all the eras, and I didn't hear Conway. Now we know Conway's still in work very much, but
there's nothing Conway in Daedalus Turbo right now, and there is I think only some certificates are parsed today. So I think he parses like pool registrations and deregistrations, because he has to track that, like Sam was saying, to get the numbers right at the epoch boundaries for stake rewards
and stake delegation.
And stake delegation. Yeah. So the delegation and undelegate, he's parsing all of those, but definitely nothing like, and I think he's doing the mirror certificates. But yeah, there's a limited validation for certificates, is just to get the numbers right is what he's done.
And I wanted to ask Sam on that, is that, what are we looking at whole new, now that Conway is coming and now that you guys are working in that area, is that a whole nother type of, are there more validations that are happening there that are unique to the governance actions, let's say, and things of that nature?
Absolutely.
Again, trying to bring this out for everybody to be able to understand the best they can, right? These are all different things that will also have to be validated, because what we're doing in Cardano as we grow is add more features, right? There's more things the chain's capable of. These are yet more new in Conway that we're going to have to add on, right?
Yep. And I think it's really important to caveat what this is not, and at least the direction it's going, that looks like he's going with, because he created the HTTP API, which Andrew can probably talk on that some with the parallel block download. But the question is, where do you get those blocks from in the first place in that HTTP API? And right now, it's looking like you have to have a centralized service to do that. Now, whether he plans on in the future implementing node-to-node network protocols, which is going to add a whole lot of complexity to the project as well, is yet to be seen. But that's something that's really, really key to know, that basically, if you use Daedalus Turbo right now, unless you're running your own local node, which is what he was trying to get away from in Daedalus anyways, you have to trust a service to give you the right blocks.
As Andrew mentioned earlier, we do that with Eternal and
That's right.
any other
Exactly.
light wallet. Yeah.
Exactly, but you
anyway.
can't call it a full node wallet at that point.
Right.
That's the main difference there. That if you're
Do you
not
think it will ever be a
participating
full
in the
node
network
wallet?
protocol, it
Will it?
currently is. Daedalus currently is a full node
No,
wallet.
no, not Daedalus. Daedalus Turbo. Sorry.
Oh,
Possibly.
Could that ever be a full node wallet?
I mean, it's got the foundations of it, but like I said, there's so many, because it's written in C, because it's tough to make it exactly like the Haskell code. Yeah, I mean, it's a huge road to get to a true full node in another language, and that's why I said don't do that until after, input endorsers, or whenever the last major rehauling of everything is done on the Haskell side. It'd be a waste of money to do it ahead of that. I think the best you're going to get with Daedalus Turbo is you've got light clients, you've got full node clients, and it's kind of like a middleweight client is what we're looking at here.
Okay. I mean,
Good.
that confuses me slightly, but
okay. Well, you're
I'm
validating
I
like
say, I'm here to ask the dumb question. So how can you have a midway between without using Mifra or whatever?
You're still, it's where the trust lies. So a full node wallet like Daedalus that runs a full Cardano node, you are trusting nobody but yourself. Like
exactly,
everything is there. With Daedalus Turbo, you're doing a lot of stuff yourself. You're trusting yourself for most things, but like Sam mentioned, you're still trusting this download service. You're still maybe not validating everything in the exact slowest right order. So you're making some assumptions that somebody else somewhere has validated that this particular transaction is okay. Whereas with a light client, you're delegating all of that trust to a remote service on the internet, like who's ever running Eternal Wallet, who's ever running Lace, Nami, you're trusting Blockfrost. The trust is pushed out.
So the way I perceive it, again, I ask stupid questions. So the way I'm perceiving it is a bit like me setting up a node like I would, like a relay, but instead of building my own DB file, I'm literally taking someone else's and I'm trusting their DB file, and then I'm running from there. Is that essentially what we're talking about?
Yeah, and you're doing some basic checks over it, like you're running through that DB file, you're checking to make sure it looks pretty good, and that's what he's doing. But it's not the same as downloading it one block at a time, validating everything in a very slow manner, going,
it's
getting
not
the
like
next
our
block.
relays and BPs.
Right.
Yeah. So, okay.
And it's worth noting that from a security perspective, the person running this service, you better absolutely trust with your life, because if they have the ability to make one block on chain, they can trick you into doing something that you think is on chain that isn't.
That's worth noting, definitely. But yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So there are concerns still. Is that what you know?
I think
there's good and bad, with any proof of concept, and I don't think we're, I'm not at the point where I'm not going to sign transactions with Daedalus Turbo as it stands today. But again, my level of comfort, or my desire of performance versus speed, like give me the lowest performance and the highest level of security. Like that's my current bent. Other people may be like, oh, I don't want to wait for this node to sync. Give me something, a little faster.
Yeah.
Speaking of which,
is to running stake pools, though, so that your security concerns do add up. But for many, like me, potentially won't really necessarily have those concerns. So.
And speaking of which, Andrew, did you want to elaborate in on the actual wallet itself and how it's tracking UTXOs basically, and address derivation of being able to identify the stake addresses that you need?
Yeah, so I had a discussion on Twitter DM with Alex. I pointed out an area where Daedalus Turbo was lacking. He's very receptive to that. He really appreciated the conversation, the back and forth, on a scientific level, I guess you would say. So the way that Daedalus Turbo is currently allowing you to query is you put in an address and it will scan through the whole blockchain and see any UTXOs or transactions related to that address. Or you can put in a stake address and it'll do the same thing. Look where that stake address is ever used, whatever. However, stake addresses are not necessarily always assigned or always stake address UTXOs are not always controlled by the wallet itself. We have dApps and protocols now that allow you to interact with them while keeping your ADA staked. So just because you see something with your stake address on chain doesn't mean you can directly control that ADA or that UTXO. And
yeah,
so
I think you tweeted about this. I think you did a thread on this. Is that it may not have been
maybe
you.
there was a Nerd Out episode a long time ago. The SIP is SIP 1852, I believe, that talks about HD wallet derivation paths.
Check out the memory.
And, well, I just looked at it earlier today because I know I was going on Spaceplace.
It's also the first number in the address derivation path, which makes it really easy to remember.
Yes. Yeah. There's also 1854, which we need to use more often. 1854 is multi-sig derivation paths. Nobody's really using them yet, but they should. Anyway,
you and I were the first ones to craft multi-sig transactions back in the Shelley testnet days.
Yeah, it could be. I've forgotten.
These two guys have forgotten more about
I just innovated, but I forgot.
So we're all clear.
Yeah. Anyway,
I innovate all the time. I can't remember everything.
1852 is the idea where you go from mnemonic phrase and you have a derivation path and you get all the addresses and keys associated with a given wallet, and then from there you query the chain with those things. And he seemed open and receptive to looking into that as well. So
just to ask more dumb questions, so I mean, what is the real difference between a staking address and a payment address? And in
I'll let Sam
they can be the same, can't they?
They actually can be the same. They're just hashes. So when you're talking about not native scripts, we're not going to go into that. But when you're talking about it, you just generate a key, and then you take the public key of that, and then you hash that public key. And that basically, with a few bits at the beginning of a header, identifies that it's a stake address or a payment address or a combination of two hashes, gives you an address, a payment stake credential. You can only hold funds on a payment address, whereas a stake address basically is associated with how you delegate to your SPO for rewards, and in the future, how you delegate to your DREP for voting.
Cool. Yeah, that's a cool in-depth explanation. Thank you.
So the wallet backend, to nerd out a little bit on what Andrew was saying there, has a coin selection algorithm, and it goes sequentially through the entire blockchain. And it has your root key, so it can derive any address associated with your mnemonic. And what it does is it derives the 0th one, and it has a look ahead. I think it's like 16 or 20 or something. I can't remember the exact number. But
some
basically,
wallets are 20, some are 40, depending on whose wallet it is.
Right, and some of them are customizable. So you have some. Example that set it to like 100 or 1,000. What?
We lost you for a
You
minute.
froze
Okay, we
up for
lost you
just
for a
a
You
minute.
second.
froze a little
Oh,
bit.
sorry.
I think
Yeah,
the
we
audio
have, there's
stayed,
like
though.
some exchange wallets that basically go from 100 to 1,000, 100,000 and whatnot. So, I mean,
Yeah.
it's completely customizable in the wallet backend. And what that look ahead does then is you look for every single transaction on chain. And if it matches one of those addresses that is associated with your payment key, it then basically adds that to your UTXOs you can spend, and it increments the counter basically of how many look aheads I have. So now I'm looking for the next set of look aheads, and
Mhm.
basically it will go through the entire chain looking for everything associated with your payment address. And it does this for 2 sets actually, because Daedalus and the wallet backend use a change address where it generates a new payment address every time for the change of your transaction it's going into, that's unrelated to the payment address that you use for receiving addresses.
Yeah, and that's
So the complexity he's going to have to mimic here to get the same Daedalus experience in the wallet side once he gets to that part is going to be pretty high level. I mean, that's or
yeah,
low level, I should say.
and we have to do that for legacy reasons, but most of the newer wallets coming out, they've taken a look at the security model of Cardano and realized that a single address wallet is very, very secure on its own. So we had this idea originally of like deriving a new key for every single change address, but that does have a number of problems with it. And this is an area that I've changed my opinion on over time. I used to think it was great, security wise, like, oh, I'm always going to have these new keys. But then when I make a new transaction, if I have to grab UTXOs off of tons of keys, then my wallet has to sign that transaction with a ton of different keys.
Ton of witnesses.
That bloats my transaction size. That means I pay a higher fee. Like, there's a lot of good reasons why most of the new modern wallets or the new light clients, they have been pushing people towards those single address wallets. So Nami was the first one to do single address wallet. Eternal started off where they would do derived, 1852 derived wallets, and then they quickly changed the default to make it a single address wallet as default. So yeah, I think it makes things a lot cleaner if you just do single address. But again, Daedalus is what Daedalus is.
I'm going to correct you, Andrew. They're the first commercial wallet to do it. I came up with the idea for single address wallets and implemented one called Add a Wallet back in 2020, shortly after the Shelley hard fork, to be able to manage hundreds of accounts with a single mnemonic.
Yeah, I do also most of my transactions with Your Manager, which is my own personal wallet that I use to run stake pools and then also manage, various drip drops funds and other stuff. But
do you even nerd out on Cardano until you've built your own wallet? That's the question to ask.
I don't think you can claim to be quite nerding out until you've built your own wallet. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I still want to run. I haven't done it yet. You gave me the stuff to do it with forever ago, a couple years ago, and I still haven't done it. But I want to run Your Manager just because it looks awesome.
Yeah,
It's got all the graphs and everything.
Interesting you mentioned Joe Manga, because I was having a conversation literally like yesterday. I thought that was a thing based on the ITN. Like when I built a pool on the ITN, I was
that's
using
Jormungandr. That's Jormungandr, the chain.
Let me share my screen again here. We're gonna do a live thing. I think this is the one. So we're looking at the pre-prod environment here. This is Your Manager. This is very similar to other tools people use for running pools. CN Tools is the most popular. This one, I'd say maybe 20 to 30 stake pools are using the system. It's more of an opinionated way to run a stake pool operation. So you set it up with hosts. These are the computers. They can either be local, like this one, Brainy. Clockwork is considered a remote node. Both of these are sitting here in my office next to me because this is, again, the test net. And then you build nodes on top of that. So, you could build a new relay node and you're just typing in information, picking, various what network you want to run on. This lets you run on mainnet, the guild network, pre-prod, preview. Mixed is an old throwaway network we had at one point. That was the one, Sam, we tested on where we were testing different node levels at the same time. The mixed.
That
was
the Vassal hard fork. That was fun.
But the idea is you go through the wizard here, setting up your pool config, relays metadata, confirm it, and then this reaches out to that remote node, logs in, creates all the infrastructure for setting it up. It's very opinionated. It only sets it up one way. Anything outside of that, you have to, get in there and tweak things yourself. And then it also has leader log capability where you can kind of see what's coming. You can calculate the leader logs. I've already calculated this one into the future. So you can choose future epoch here because we're less than 1.5 days away from the epoch. So it'll do that. I can say, look into the future in 128. Here's the blocks I have upcoming across my, I think I'm running 5 pre-prod pools, something like that. Then the feature I talked about was the wallet. And this is just where you're creating single key-based wallets. Owner addresses. So I've got a bunch of Noom test stuff going on here.
So what's your seed phrase for all of these?
Well, they're on pre.
These are not seed phrase based wallets. These are.
God, damn it!
They're
CLI.
They're CLI random wallets that get put into the Drawer Manager database in an encrypted format. So, and then they're decrypted by a spending password. So it's not the ultimate in security. Like there are people that run their pools in a very, everything is cold mode, and I've chosen to take the trade-off of
encryption.
Things are not cold, but they're at least encrypted at rest. So that's what I do.
There's one thing your demo reminded me of that we really should mention about Turbo. And it's one thing that I disagree with how he developed it. Normally, when you develop a product, you should develop it for a test net so people can actually use it, play with it, try things out without putting any funds at risk. And what he's done in the code base is hard coded all over the place, special cases specific to mainnet for like BFT nodes, the pre-Genesis or the pre-Shelley nodes, when reserves things had things change at specific epochs and whatnot. And by doing that, he's made it very, very difficult for someone to actually take it for a test drive on a network other than mainnet. So I hope he takes my advice in making that more configurable and encouraging it to be used more on a testnet, especially as he starts to develop more features where you can actually do stuff with it. Rather than right now where it just shows, hey, I'm able to sync the chain. Look at this.
Yeah, and I think the reason he made that choice is because that's where the criticism or the critics were, is like, if he just did testnet and it synced really fast, we'd be like, well, who cares? That's easy because there's no real transaction volume on testnet. And he's trying to prove performance. And the only way we can prove performance is to show mainnet. So I definitely think I agree with you. He should go back and make it configurable so that the first version that he puts in Daedalus, it points to a test net, and we see how it works.
Yep.
Yeah, you could do an apples to apples there. You could do a Daedalus without the turbo and a Daedalus turbo side by side, same kind of computer, and let them both run and see what see. Even if it's a test net, it still can see if there's a difference.
Yeah.
On that note, guys, we are just over an hour. This has been a fantastic journey through the stars with the Nerd Out team. Andrew, thank you for being here. Sam, also, thank you for coming. Not from IO today, just Sam for himself. Thank you for coming and sharing your voice with us today as well. Appreciate it. Josh, thank you. We always love the dumb questions. They're the best questions. We really
That's what I'm
appreciate
here for, man.
It was an
You know,
amazing
people
surprise to
understand,
finally be
but,
on Nerd Out.
you know, nerd out. You what was it? You sum it down, but don't dumb it down.
Break
Yeah.
it down, but don't dumb it
That's
down.
exactly
Yep.
it. Yeah.
And
that's what I'm here
Danny
for. I
Rybar
need to
giving us
dumb
the
it
thumbs
down.
up. We had a great discussion today. Thank you, Danny, as well for poking in, letting us know you were watching. We appreciate it. Appreciate everybody that paid attention and watched today. If you've got more questions, you know where to reach us. Thank you all, and we'll see you next time.
See you guys.